Good afternoon, and welcome to today's InfoCast, e-commerce trends and shopper expectations, health and wellness. I'm Patrick Spear, President and CEO of GMDC Retail Tomorrow, and we're happy you've joined us. We're excited to host you and your colleagues today, and I'm pleased to introduce two industry thought leaders with terrific insights into today's subject. First, Andrea Lee, VP of Strategy and Insights at Ideoclick, and the founder of Andrea Lee Consulting. Also with us is Rody Wing, a partner at Kearney, focused on innovation in retail and health and wellness. Welcome to you both. Before we go deep into the topic, I'd like to ask both of you to provide just a quick bio and background on your work and practice areas. And Andrea, I'll start with you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, Patrick. I'm really excited to be here today and really excited and honored to have a chance to talk with Rody about some of these topics. So my background is I run a consulting firm, Andrea Lee Consulting. We're focused on e-commerce, education, and strategy. I'm also one of the owners of and the former vice president of strategy and client services at Ideoclick, which is an Amazon managed services agency, where we serve about 350 brands selling on Amazon, Walmart, Instacart, and Target. And I also, prior to that, spent 10 years at Amazon as a senior executive and category leader, leading up various categories, about 15 different categories in my time there, but with a pretty hefty focus on health and personal care, consumables, grocery, and Amazon Fresh. So really excited to be here today, and thanks for having me, Patrick.
Great to have you, Andrea. Thank you. Rody.
Perfect. Thanks, Patrick. And excited to be here as well and have a conversation with Andrea and Patrick on kind of what's happening in the world today. Lots to discuss for sure. In terms of background, so I'm a partner at Kearney. I do focus in retail, health, and consumer. And where I get really excited is where all those things come together. I believe there's a lot of opportunity to grow, both in terms of sales and profitability, but also in terms of really changing outcomes and improving lives. By focusing on better solutions for customers and patients, and really bringing those to bear. Spent the last 15, 16 years in consulting, primarily working with retailers and CPGs that are both in this kind of consumer health retail space. So seeing lots of evolutions and lots of back and forth, to be honest. And so it's great to spend some time today talking about where we're at and kind of how e-commerce is really changing the game. Not just online, but also in store.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for the overview. And again, we're grateful for your time today. For those of you who are viewing this InfoCast, and if you have any questions for Andrea and Rody, please feel free to hit the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be happy to address any questions that come in. So, Andrea, I'd like to start with you. We were together virtually yesterday. I was a participant in the Emerson Group Industry Day, and I know you were there live at the event and had an opportunity to participate, to listen. I found there was a lot of fascinating insights that came out of that session. And we were talking earlier about some of the founders and innovators and the commitments they're willing to make to succeed online, in store. Let's talk a little bit about that in terms of some of these companies coming in, some of these health and wellness brands, and how they think about competing, and what does that mean for the legacy brands, and some of the challenges that are inherent on both sides.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So I think it was a year or two ago, I sat in a meeting with a major CPG where we were talking about market share, and they kind of glossed over this one graph that had a little slice that was the other category online. It seemed to be growing over time. And I was like, well, what's that? And they said, oh, those are all the ankle biters online, specifically on Amazon. And that comment really stuck with me because, at Ideoclick, we work with major CPGs, but we also work with a lot of small challenger brands. Yeah. And we have had brands come to us in the past and say, I'm a brand new brand. I don't have any brand awareness yet, but I'm private equity backed and I'd like to be at Costco next year. Can you make Amazon a win for me in order for me to have a good case to bring to Costco? And we had a program for that, and we're successful in doing that for a lot of brands. And so the comment about the ankle biters stuck with me because I think those brands may seem to be that because they're not necessarily being sold in brick and mortar retail, particularly in health and wellness, where I think we see a lot of challenger brands and just a lot of brand churn in general. So the CPGs, the established or traditional CPGs, aren't necessarily seeing those brands on the physical shelf, but they're certainly all over the digital shelf. And when we're looking at metrics around search and share of search and the search presence of some of these challenger brands, a lot of time they're in a better position than some of the more traditional brands. And the founders panel, I thought, was particularly interesting because you got to hear the stories of some of these challenger brands that are now are running like 200 store tests with Target, or are in 30,000 doors for other retailers, and the story of how they got there, which just includes so much like grit and determination and smarts and pulling in different mentors and really figuring out how to be successful. There was one woman who talked about having sort of a problem with a retailer she was trying to service, had to return all the inventory to her, and she almost lost her house, but she kept on. So that's the kind of talent and determination and foresight, I think, that we're dealing with in some of these challenger brands, and they're quite extraordinary.
Interesting. Rhody, I suspect in your practice, you probably have similar experiences, or hear similar anecdotes or see similar stories. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think across the industry, you're seeing a lot of these challenger brands, challenger organizations popping up. It's very easy for large CPG companies to put them in the other bucket, right? Because they start out as a bit of a rounding error, right? For them, they just don't impact them. Like what they're going after, doesn't really move the needle for them, and so they kind of put them in that other bucket. The challenge is they're chipping away, right? And there's more and more of them every year, and it's really difficult for anyone to know which ones are really going to catch fire. And to Andrea's point, these are people with grit. These are people with determination. These are people who aren't just going to give up, right? It's so there's a different mentality and forethought that kind of comes with these entrepreneurs and kind of pushing what they're going for. And a lot of them are driven by mission. A lot of them are driven by something they're solving for their own personal pain point. And that's such a powerful connection to customers and builds community. And so what you see is they start to get traction and really have an impact. And so as these kind of chips add up, that becomes a real challenge for businesses that have been built on scale, right? So if we think about, retailers, if we think about, CPG companies, it's all about scale, right? The volume that we can push through. And as that volume gets chipped away, then before long, it becomes a problem. And the question is, do you notice the problem before it's there or not? And that's kind of the evolution that I think we're seeing there. And I think one of the things we're starting to see with retailers in particular is they're starting to say, maybe I listened to the big CPGs too long. Maybe I need to listen to my customers a bit more to be relevant. Maybe I need these to be relevant. Maybe I need these challenge brands, these mission-driven organizations, companies, entrepreneurs to be relevant. And how do I bring those to my customers? And sometimes it's an in-store experience, sometimes it's a digital experience, sometimes it's integrated. And those are the experiments that we're seeing. And it's quite a bit interesting to see kind of how those come to life and what those look like in store.
I think that's
Go ahead.
Such a great point, Rhody, because yesterday during the founders panel, or during the Rite Aid gave a talk about their new assortment strategy at Industry Day, and they talked about how all of the products that they're going to be focused on going forward need to check one of these boxes around mission driven, good for the environment, gives back, donations, Black or minority owned, women owned, not animal tested. I mean, they had this whole list, and their assortment strategy is going to be pretty focused around that, because I think they are hearing from the customer, and we are seeing a lot of customer trends that show that that's really important to customers right now. I think it kind of goes back to, I mean, I think it's a COVID driven or COVID accelerated trend, which is we're all kind of evaluating. We're in like a period of evaluation. It's like self-evaluation, life evaluation. What do we care about? Where do we want to put our dollars? And so I think that's impacting the types of products that consumers are looking for as well.
Yeah, no, I think it's spot on. I mean, I think, you know, again, COVID accelerated so many things, and there are hints of these trends, but we're seeing them come back more and more as people want that connection, people want that community, people are driven by the whole kind of experience connection to their mission, not just kind of the product. And obviously the product's important, like that's where it starts. But people want to buy into more than the product. They want to buy into the idea. They want to buy into the connection and the community that comes with it, which is, you know, where we see all the influencers and all of those playing a big role in kind of telling that story and connecting it.
You know, it's interesting to hear both, you know, this idea of how Rite Aid's thinking about it, but Rody, to your point, you know, how retailers are thinking, you know, and reconsidering the voice of the consumer as opposed to just the voice of the brands. And that's new because, and you think about going back, 25 years ago, worked for a company that was ranked #1 by Fortune as the most admired company in the country. And we were running a lot of business through, at the time, you know, the mass channel. Differentiation was brutal. And, you know, for us, it was mostly one size fits all. And you had some people that were coming in, you know, playing in, you know, on the fringes and some categories that weren't our biggest, but they started, to your point, Rody, chipping away, and they're all of a sudden getting share. And that is the same thing we see today. And whether it's share online or, you know, starting online and migrating to brick and mortar or expanding distribution, you know, around specific channel objectives, it's out there. I think if we look at COVID's accelerated things and changed things, let's talk about the migration to online and how brands are succeeding. But I think too, what are some of the inherent challenges now as we see advertising increase online, and what does that mean for manufacturers, and how do they think about their brands and how they're going to play there? So what do you guys see there?
Well, I think there's, it's just a completely different competitive set online, I think is the first point, at least on Amazon and also on Walmart, because they've got a marketplace. Target's marketplace is a bit more curated. But if you're looking at marketplaces in general, the competitive set's going to be completely different. And I just did a piece on my blog around search and these ankle biter competitors. And I pulled the search results for the term peanut butter, and over half of the search results are not nationally distributed brands. They're either niche, private label, or what I'm calling category adjacent, which is Amazon's turning up a product in the search, or there are advertisements for a product it's in a similar category, and their algorithms know that people are likely to buy that after they search peanut butter, like powdered peanut butter, or, you know, in some cases, peanut butter crackers and things like that. And so the competitive set's really different, and you're up against brands that are digitally native or maybe even just marketplace native that are putting their whole ad budget there. You know, they're not allocating it across different forms of media, or even in some cases social, or even in some cases other marketplaces. They're funneling it all to one retailer, and that's really driving up the ad prices. The CPCs are up quite a bit year over year, and we saw it last year as well versus year prior in 2019. And I think it means that manufacturers need to have a different type of advertising strategy that isn't so keyword driven. I think we were all fast to get on the bandwagon of keyword advertising on Amazon and even on Google. But now I think, there's these marketplace retailers have enough data that you can do different types of targeting. You can look at custom customer profiling. The retail ad platforms are getting much more sophisticated that allow you to break away from just bidding on peanut butter over and over again, or face moisturizer actually is another example that has really similar results, and be a bit more nuanced about how you're targeting the consumer.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I think I think that is the big unlock, is understanding who are the customers, the consumers that you're trying to connect with and go after, right? The reality is, and this is one of the things that I think organizations are really struggling with, is the world of mass, our kind of mass scale model that we built through the 80s and the 90s and the early noughts, broken, doesn't work anymore. None of us are appealed, like mass just doesn't have the appeal that it had before. And so you have to figure out who are you connecting with and how do you do that? And it's really
Rody,
challenging.
why do you think it doesn't have the appeal that it did before?
So I think there's a few things. One, I think culturally everything is getting diffused, right? Like if you think about everyone watched Friends, right, in the 90s, everyone watched Seinfeld in the 90s. Like, do we have that today? I mean, everything is getting diffused. Like things are breaking up. Communities are kind of seeing themselves differently, and we are trying to tap into. Most people are, you kind of see this cultural view of like being a bit more individual. Like I'm an individual. What does that mean? What is my mission? That whole self-reflection piece. And so that's all part of why mass starts to not fit as well as it used to. Now it has a role to play, right? Because there's also things where, it's routine. Things that I don't like that are routine, like I just want to simplify that journey. I want to make that journey as efficient as possible. But what's defined as routine for me will be different than another customer segment. And
it sounds like you're saying there's like we're having fewer shared experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
That's really interesting.
So but as I think about it's seemingly got to play havoc for legacy brands, companies built on scale, right? Because if we say, well, we've got to think about our strategy at a specific e-tailer or retailer, we got to figure out how we're going to differentiate or how we're going to promote. We might not have, from a manufacturing standpoint, the rapid changeover times. We're built for, turn it on and let it run for a couple of days. We're not going to do a swap out or a transition for a different product. It's got to be tough. And some of these challenger brands coming in, they aren't burdened with that structure, with that strategy. So what does this portend for legacy brands or the big CPGs as you think about some of these trends or some of these pressures that are coming into the business? Hey, Brody, I suspect you see it with some of your clients, and Andrea, I suspect with some of your clients as well, in terms of how they're having to adapt.
So I think one of the biggest adaptation is this. Most of these larger organizations struggle with complexity, right? Yeah. And so they've spent years and years trying to simplify and make processes as straightforward as possible. The reality is, in this kind of diffused world that we live in, complexity is inevitable. And so you have to change, you can't get rid of the complexity, you just have to change how you manage your business so you can manage complexity better. And you have to think about designing for a more complex world. And that's been one of the things that I think organizations have struggled with, right? I mean, the reality is, you could have the same product. It could mean very different things to very different customers, right? And how do you have that conversation? How do you manage that complexity is something that I think brands and CPGs are really struggling with.
And how do you tell that whole story within just the little search result?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
There's a lot to pack into that little itty bitty search result. But I think you're totally right, Rody. And I feel like it's this like perfect storm right now of to your points around some of the trends around individualism that are so important in driving consumer preferences, along with greater access to a broader set of products that was brought on by the e-commerce acceleration and D2C. And then you have kind of the last 12 months of COVID or 18 months of COVID aside, generally speaking, manufacturing prices and manufacturing becoming more accessible and manufacturing prices coming down a little bit. So one of the founders yesterday has a natural beauty product, and in the founders forum yesterday has a natural beauty product at an opening price point of $9.99. I mean, that was not something you could accomplish, 10, 20 years ago with a limited run and all of that. And so I think it's just this perfect storm of really being a good time to be a challenger brand.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too, in the light of some of those trends and, challenger brands coming in, a good time to be, coming to market or, finding a manufacturing partner, whatever it might be. But, the knock-on effects, if you will, of a global pandemic and the supply chain disruption resulting, okay, again, when you think about the customer behavior is shifting, what they're looking for, where they're going to buy it, shopping online, what does that mean for brands? But then throw in all the inherent supply chain challenges that COVID has foisted upon the industry. Yeah. And that, that's got to, add, Rody, you talk about dealing with complexity. Yep. That's complexity at scale and something that most probably manufacturers, most, operations folks didn't necessarily see coming.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think that's been a big challenge. And we saw really interesting solutions throughout the pandemic to deal with surges in demand, challenges with supply, to kind of navigate that. But as we're coming out, I think one of the learnings that most organizations are trying to understand is, especially in this environment where, you have bifurcation of spend online versus in-store versus buy online, pick up in store, is, what should our supply chain strategy be? What do we need to enable? What does meeting our customers' needs mean? And which are the items that they need to be in that store every single time, or we're going to lose our trust with the customer?
Yeah.
Which are the items that we can recover from? Like we can, make up for it by shipping it to their house for them. Like, what are the recovery strategies when we do fall short? And what are the items we shouldn't even carry in our store? What are the items that are really quite unnecessary to take up space in the store? And so you're seeing a lot of questions coming around, talking through that. And, before COVID, we kept talking about stores need to be experiential. It's all going to be about experience. That's the only way a store is going to survive. And I think on the other side of COVID, that's more true than ever, but maybe we understand it a little bit more in terms of what that means, right? So what does it mean for, a routine shopping experience versus a shopping? Like I coming in to actually shop, to explore, to test, to try something new, to be exposed. There's a role for stores to play, in that showroom, right? If you look at the transformation of Best Buy, I think is a great example. There is a showroom effect, right? And
Absolutely.
And embracing that is something that I think retailers struggle with, because it feels like they're giving something up. But that's an important part of the customer experience moving into the future.
Absolutely. A friend recently told me that she bought a kayak on Amazon, but she first made sure Costco sold it. So like looking for that curation and that affirmation that a Costco buyer has spent time vetting this product versus choosing from the 10,000 kayaks that are for sale on Amazon. And I thought that was a really interesting example. And, in thinking about kind of that role of brick and mortar, it's certainly to provide curation.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and even other e-commerce retailers, or, omni-channel retailers, more specifically competing with Amazon, I think that's really a huge point of differentiation, is that curation, because so much, we have decision fatigue. I've been reading articles about how we have that sort of, it's almost like a little bit of another pandemic that we're experiencing, is that we've all spent so much time making really difficult choices over the last couple of years that we've got decision fatigue, and choice can be taxing. And I think that, that's an important role of some of the, the non-marketplace oriented retailers, is to provide that curation for the customer. And, in thinking about some of the areas, like you had asked, Patrick, where the, maybe more traditional or experienced manufacturers have an advantage right now, I think a big one is in their scale and in their diversification. So for example, a challenger brand might be completely disrupted from a supply chain perspective, whereas most of the major CPGs I'm working with, they have some disruption, but it's certainly not across their entire assortment. And so they're able to, they can continue to sell products, and they can pivot their advertising to maybe different lines, or, or different brands, or figure out ways to kind of continue to weather the storm. And then I think, again, those retailer brick and mortar relationships are so key, having retailers and buyers at other retailers, having curated that assortment, it says a lot to the customer, and particularly in these categories where, there's a high risk of counterfeit, but in buying on marketplaces for customers, they're looking for that validation that it's, it's been vetted by a brand, it's been vetted by a retailer and a buyer before it made its way into the store. So I think there are a lot of advantages that some of the traditional manufacturers have right now.
No,
see this idea of, choice fatigue, and just, curate it for me, make it so I don't have to give it a lot of thought. I can just get in, get out, that type of thing, right? So then it really speaks to the importance of trust between that consumer and that retailer. But, that trust is eroded. And, I was up last week at an event with HRG, and I was reminded that Dave Hummacher many years ago coined the phrase "never out." Right? What are the items you can't ever be out on? Right? So you have your never outs, and so much of that trust that's built up from that curation, that assortment. I go in, you made it simple for me, get me in, get me out. Some of that trust is now being eroded because of these supply chain challenges. I was at a national retailer over the weekend, and I was shocked, capital S, shocked at the out of stocks. And and I hadn't been out in the store in a couple of weeks. When I went in, I'm looking at it thinking, boy, this is a pervasive issue. And then you start talking to somebody at the checkout about the labor. And there's, I asked I was doing a propane exchange, and they said to me, "Yeah, let me see if we've got the labor, if we've got somebody who can do that for you. I don't know if we got anybody that can get out front. You may not be able to do it today." Never heard that before. And what that does is begins to erode trust. You start to think, well, gosh, maybe I need to look elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
No, 100%. I mean, these are all kind of key points I think are going to be important points of differentiation. They are now, but they will continue to be, as trust, that curation and that credibility.
Yeah.
And it's something all brands need to think about. I think you think about trust, that like this retail store can serve the need that I expect it to, right? Like there are certain things that I expect you to have. And, as humans, we always have a certain amount of being willing to forgive.
Yeah.
It's limited, right? some more than others, but there's a limit to that as well. And what you're seeing now is not only the supply chain, like the upstream supply chain distributions. You have issues with Ocean Light. You have issues with the trucks getting to the stores. You have issues with having labor to take the stuff off the trucks and put them on the shelves. You have, so there's so many challenges right now that like lead to eroding that trust, that I think it's something that retailers really need to be being really thoughtful of. I think the other piece on the retail side is, trust goes two ways. And some of the things that like retailers have to think about is, how do they connect and communicate that they trust their customers? How do they make their customers, like, a relationship always goes two ways, and sometimes we forget that. And that's an important part of the piece as well. And then, the last point I think is, so many more people have gone online and ordered, which also means so many people have had, those online horror stories where like, what did I get? Like, there's one story of like the solar drying machine was like a clothesline. So everyone has those stories. And so, that trust and that credibility is going to be super important. And that's advantage for retailers. That's advantage for big brands, but they need to make sure they're thinking about that they don't do things that erode it, to your point, Patrick. And for those challenger brands, how do they build it? How do they build that trust and kind of maintain it? Because it's hard to regain once lost.
Yes.
I want to come back to something you said, because so retailers need to know that they can trust their customers. What does that look like? How does that manifest? What does that mean in terms of how does a retailer, build that, or how does a consumer build that for a retailer? I guess is that the best way to think about it.
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a few different ways, but one thing that just like irks me the most is, in many parts of the US right now, if someone's shoplifting, the staff are encouraged not to engage the shoplifter. Right. So the person who's coming in to physically steal from you, you actually put less barriers for them than a customer who wants to come and return something. Right. And think about that. Think about this.
It's crazy,
right? Like just think about it. So, our customers who, are our customers, how do we treat them when they want to return something? How do we engage them when things don't go well? How do we show up for them? Right. And I think the reality is, I think through the pandemic, through all of the like health and safety measures all the stores took, that was actually a good show of like, here are the things that we're doing for you, and how do you kind of have that two-way conversation? It's not easy, but I think sometimes we sub-optimize on certain dimensions that then drive a pretty awful customer experience.
Interesting. Let me shift gears. I want to talk about this idea of phygital. Okay, physical meets digital. We had a startup mic drop a couple of weeks ago, and we were focused on phygital solutions. That's got to present a whole set of challenges for retailers in terms of how to engage their customer. If we think about it within the context of health and wellness and products out there, back to this idea of the never outs. you've got to accommodate for, somebody who's doing BOPUS or somebody who's ordering and you're shipping it directly to them, somebody who's walking in this afternoon. What specific challenges as we think about this merging of, the digital and the physical, what challenges does that portend and create for the retailers, but also for the brands in terms of how they think about how they engage their customer?
I think even going further upstream than the point where the consumer is engaging with the retailer, we're in an era of always on shopping. Consumers used to make a list and go to a physical store and be a bit more purposeful about their shopping behavior, but shopping has become a passive activity, particularly since the pandemic, as we're spending, something like 1 to 2 hours more per day consuming digital media. And so you're shopping while you're reading the news in the morning, passively. You're shopping while you're on a Zoom call. You're shopping while you're scrolling Instagram. And so there's this passive shopper that I think we need to have, kind of going back to some traditional 4 Ps. Like, you have to have the right product, the right time, the right message, because the type of advertisement or engagement that you're going to put in front of a consumer who's scrolling Instagram needs to be totally different than what you put in front of a customer when they are, typing your brand into a search bar on a retailer website. And that's, the first one might be more, you're introducing the consumer to your brand, you're maybe providing some inspirational content, but then, when they're typing the search term into Amazon, for example, you need to be focused on conversion and activation, maybe a coupon, or maybe something that encourages that conversion because you're pretty far down the funnel. And so I think that always on shopper is, it's a real mind shift for us, I think, as in brands and retailers alike. And then I think insofar as when the consumer hits the retailer, the other trend that we're faced with right now is the consumer's thinking about, when do I need it? That's where they're starting. They're like, do I need it in an hour? Can I wait a few days? And like, one end of the spectrum is, I'm out of dog food, I have to have it by tonight. And the other end of the spectrum is auto replenishment, where I don't need it for another month and I'm signed up. And so we have to, I think retailers who are going to win are going to do a really good job of identifying where the consumer is on that spectrum and tailoring, and making sure the customer understands there are different options that are available to them, whether it's BOPUS or, go into the physical store, have it delivered, whatever it is. I do feel like we're seeing a little bit of an overreaction to that 1 to 2 hour delivery, with so many retailers focused on getting it to customers really quickly. And we may be trying to get products to customers quickly that don't need them quickly. And so we're giving away a lot of value, and because it's very expensive to make that happen. And if we can figure out a way to let the customer self-select a little bit more, I think it's a much more sustainable value proposition.
Yeah. And to be clear, I'm not shopping right now while we're having this conversation.
Oh, really? I've already bought it and stuff. Like, I'm going to debt at this point.
Rody, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's spot on. I mean, I think one of the things that I think, again, just this whole mass idea is like, it's all or nothing. Like, we don't actually give customers as much choice as they need. Most things people don't need in 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours. Now, occasionally I do, and if you can deliver it, that's like a hero moment.
Yes.
But most of the things I don't need in that kind of speed. And so thinking through, again, I think Andrew's point, like, how do you give customers choice? How do you help them make decisions that make sense for them and make sense for the business? I think is something most organizations are still struggling with. And I think partially it was because everyone was really behind the 8 ball pre-COVID. And then they went from like nothing to everything in 4 months. So I think that's part of the challenge. I think the other piece that retailers are struggling with is who do I prioritize and how do I balance, right? Like, there are grocery stores where the Instacart shoppers are crowding out the customers.
Like, who's the customer at that point?
Yeah, exactly. And so I think a lot of retailers are trying to figure out, how do I balance these experiences? How do I make sure that I can deliver to my BOPUS customer, to my delivery customer, and to the customer who still wants to come into the store? And that's the other kind of piece that people are tending to struggle with in terms of, how do I seek balance there? And And, part of that balance is, rethinking your supply chain. Part of that balance is, thinking about real, nudges that you can do in terms of how people make decisions on timing on when they need things. There's a lot that can be done there, but I think we're just at the beginning of trying to see what the right resolutions are.
Rody, I wrote that down. I wrote that down. You said delivery doesn't always have to be a hero moment. That is, that's great. That's great.
Well, and it speaks to, I think, the challenge inherent for retailers, but by extension, the brands. Is there, I'm going to start with the idea that there has been a knee-jerk reaction to, well, I got to match Amazon. I mean, if they're doing it, I got to figure out a way to do it. I got to partner with Instacart, even though I'm not going to have any of the data. I've got to respond and have a 2-hour option. I've got to let people come into my stores who are going to crowd out my loyal shoppers. I've got to do this, this, and this to compete. And I think, Rody, to your point, there probably needs to be an examination of which of those things are essential versus which ones can move down the priority list based on what they know or the conversations and the trust they built with their customers. I know at the height of the pandemic and shopping at a Whole Foods near me, there were many more, shoppers in there than customers. And, you felt like you were getting crowded out, whether it was a place to park or people, in the store cutting you off and, moving through. And that's not a great shopping experience. It's not a good look for a retailer. And it certainly is a dissatisfier for a consumer. So I think too is, how do retailers think about what really matters? Delivery doesn't have to be a hero moment. Maybe there's something that is heroic that they can get to. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah, I think you're right. And by the way, there's this great, if you guys don't watch Silicon Valley, there's this great episode where they go to the grocery store and they're the only actual customers in the store. It's like crammed with all these like Instacart-ish shoppers. It's really, in the Bay Area. It's really funny. No, but I agree that there has been this knee-jerk reaction to Amazon's delivery speed, but I think we all need to remember that Amazon's points of differentiation are their broad assortment and fast delivery. And that's what they stand for. And I mean, like my dad always used to say to me, you worry about you. Like, you think about what are the other retailers' points of differentiation? And you don't need to compete with Amazon necessarily on delivery speed all the time for all the products. That doesn't need to be your point of differentiation. You can offer an option, but it doesn't need to be the point of differentiation. I think recognizing what your point of differentiation is as a retailer. You have a point of view on assortment. You have a great in-store experience. You have really streamlined BOPUS. You have great private label brands. Whatever it is, like continuing to lean into that, I think is really important right now versus kind of like a me too.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about Amazon gives you choice in delivery time, right? Like it's not everything's being delivered later today when I order it. I have choices, and sometimes I choose, like, it might not make a big price difference, but I choose a later time because I just don't need it. Like, people make responsible decisions, and I think sometimes a lot of the knee-jerk reaction has been we can only do it one way, or we can't really give them option, or the option is as fast as possible because that's what they want. And in most instances, that is not what the consumers are looking for.
When you guys think about you scan the horizon, okay, and you think about all the attributes that come into play in trying to satisfy a customer. Are there any retailers that you see today that are doing a particularly good job in terms of whether it's the online experience or the BOPUS experience, or how they're managing the variables that come into play, or anybody you see that you think is noteworthy?
I mean, I'm always super bullish on Target. Like, I think they're nailing it on so many fronts. Private brands. I mean, they've built, what was it? All in Motion became $1 billion brand in a year. I mean, that's incredible. Like that's unreal. That's not private label anymore. That's brand building. And I think they've done, I mean, just a bang up job with the private label. BOPUS is really streamlined. We heard from a lot of shoppers on the shopper panel yesterday that they use BOPUS with Target all the time. They've got great curation. They're really focused on having like a good balance of new and, inspiring merchandise. So I've always been pretty bullish on Target. Maybe it's because I'm from Minneapolis area, which is their home.
Homer alert.
Yeah. So I'm not from Minneapolis, and I also agree. I think Target's actually an interesting story because they went from really not great to really leading the pack very, very, very rapidly. And they are the ones who are, pushing solutions to balance their BOPIS customers balance. They've reworked their stock rooms to take some of those BOPIS shoppers out of the store and into the back rooms. Like they're thinking through it in a way that I think is very customer centered, and they're winning for it for sure.
On their last earnings call, they shared a couple of things that I thought were interesting. One is that a lot of their BOPIS customers, when they survey them, say that part of the reason they're doing BOPIS is basically just to reserve the inventory, to make sure that it's there when they get to the store, and that a lot of them still come into the store. And I thought that was really interesting. I don't know what that looks like for other retailers, but BOPIS being more of an opportunity to reserve inventory, and maybe that's a COVID thing, who knows, but just making sure it'll be there when you get there, like you got your basics covered, and then you can still go in and spend time shopping and not worry that you're going to run out of time going through the clothing department and not get to the toothpaste. Which maybe I'm just talking about myself right now, but
you're sharing a lot, Andrea.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, it's that whole, like, again, what is the mission, right? There's the routine mission, and I wanted to make sure I get that done. But one of the things that Target does well is they do create an experience. They do create. I do want to go in. I do want to check out what's in the dollar spot. I want to see, what they have in the clothing. I want to see, now with Ulta, like, I want to experiment more with beauty. Like, they're creating an experience in store that says, okay, I got my routine stuff delivered to my trunk. Now let me go shop.
Yes, let make that an event, or yeah, I like that.
And to the extent that they're doing that and succeeding with that, it gets to this idea where, okay, you're curating an experience for me. You're going to put that stuff, directly. It's waiting for me. I don't have to spend time looking for it, so I'm not going to go over I'm running out of time to get to the toothpaste aisle, Andrea. But it also gets back to this idea of experience, right? Because by doing that, now I can focus on the experiential piece that I want to go discover, or I want to go find something, or I want to go try something new.
And that's the fun part. I mean, if you're looking at the in-store experience, that's the fun part. Shopping for toothpaste isn't fun.
No.
And so they've figured out a way to make BOPIS super streamlined, so you can just take care of the not fun part, and then you can pop in to do the fun part. And I mean, I don't know that every retailer feels quite as fun as Target, so maybe it's unique to their business model, but I'm pretty bullish on them. I think they're doing a nice job with that.
Got a question that's just come in, so let me get to this for you guys. Any specific advice you would give to a brand or a manufacturer that's looking to scale online? So again, this gets back, perhaps, Andrea, to some of the things you heard yesterday in the Founders Forum, but any specific advice you'd give to, or practical advice, who wants, somebody who's starting out or expanding online?
Yeah, I mean, if you're sort of a newer challenger brand, I think there are some interesting tactics around looking, really kind of having a nuanced advertising strategy, because you have to buy your place in search until you earn it. And so figuring out ways to buy that place in search by focusing not necessarily on the highest volume keywords and not necessarily having a long tail strategy, but picking some in the middle that you perform well on. That's kind of like the starter package that we work on with some of the more mid-market or growth level clients, is let's find some sweet spots in the middle and then continue to build the search relevance. If you're looking at platforms off of Amazon online, there are more ways to gain reviews. On Amazon, they only have the Vine program, but reviews are really important. And, customers aren't going to buy anything that doesn't have reviews. That being said, customers can also spot fake reviews. So we don't want to go too far the other direction, but like Walmart allows you to syndicate reviews from your own D2C site. Some of the other retailers have different rules about it. So just getting familiar with those and making sure that you've got, an adequate number of reviews relative to the competition. And then I think the other thing is the other important piece is inventory. So if you're selling directly to some of the e-commerce sites, especially if you're new, the forecast might not be great. And so it's going to be hard to ramp up. And so figuring out ways to have multiple ways that you're providing inventory to the retailer, whether it's through having selling directly to them, and then also selling as a third-party seller to have some backup, or working through another trusted third-party seller, but just making sure there's no interruption to the inventory, because that really impacts the position in search. And then you have to kind of like pay, there's a penalty, like you have to pay to get your ranking back up. So I think those are like very high level kind of three things that I think are important to focus on.
Excellent. Rody, question for you is whether it's retailers or brands thinking about, the e-com play and the opportunity with your clients, any contemplation or discussion around the role that AI plays in altering their strategy or thinking about how brands or retailers best compete?
Yeah, so I think there's a few places. So we talked a bit about inventory never outs and getting better at stock positioning, particularly as there's more complexity. AI has a huge role in trying to fill that need because the complexity is just it's just too much for me to do in Excel. Like I can't, it's gotta go next level. So we see a lot of AI being deployed there. I think the other piece is, AI is being more and more deployed to engage with customers, right? In terms of what they see on the website, what they see in the app, what they see across different platforms. And in fact, one of the things that I think retailers need to and brands need to get quickly smart on is how do they do that better? One of the things that we're seeing is consumers are much more conscious of their data and what they're sharing and how they're sharing it. And they're okay with sharing it. But there's certain that one, they want to have control of it, and two, they have expectations, right? And so if I share my data with you, and this grows year over year, I expect you to know me. I get mad when you present me something that is so irrelevant to me. Like I get really quite upset about it. And
you're like, come on, we can do better than this.
Right? It's like being in an unhealthy relationship where the other person never listens to you. Like that is not. That's not a success. And so
I didn't see us going there, but we went there. Yeah, it's perfect. It's great analogy.
Everything. And so like there's a lot of AI being deployed to try to get better at that. And I think retailers and brands need to move much faster because I think consumer expectations are growing year over year in terms of, I expect you to tailor things to me. I expect things to be more personalized to me.
Yeah.
And I think winners will figure that out sooner than the losers.
I agree, Rody. You have all my data at this point. Like all the retailers say, you have all my data. You know what I've bought. You're still accepting third-party cookies, so you know all the sites I've been to. Like you can do better than showing me this ad. You're showing everyone else.
All right, I got another question that came in from one of our viewers. Beyond health, beauty, and wellness, are there examples of categories that are bridging the divide between brick and mortar and online exceedingly well? And if so, if there are categories that are doing a good job, what could the HBW brands learn from these participants or from these categories?
Well, I would like to take us on a time machine back into like 2005 when Amazon sold a lot of books online. And I mean, I think I'll give a book's example, but I think that there is a consistent theme in categories that have transitioned well online, where the retailer or brand has tried to identify what the point of friction is with the customer and then address that through a form of technology. And for books, it was that customers liked to be able to flip through the book and just read little excerpts. That's the experience you have at a bookstore. And so Amazon launched Search Inside the Book, where you can virtually have that experience. And now no one buys print books. There are not many people anymore, but at their peak, they were selling, most books were being sold online. And they've attacked, and other retailers as well have attacked a number of categories in this way. So like, what is the point of friction in buying jewelry online? Well, it's really hard to tell the relative size of different jewelry. And so many retailers now have, they show like sort of a grayed out, silhouette, and then the relative size of the jewelry is shown, sort of like the earrings or the necklace or the pendant or whatever. So I think it's about identifying that point of friction. So health and beauty and wellness it's a really broad category, but often, for example, for supplements, it's, I want to know what's in it. I want to be able to read the packaging. I want to understand where it's sourced. There's a lot of, because I'm going to put it in my body. And so how do we make sure that we're doing that on our D2C sites or through the retailers that we work with, and we have that information front and center? And so I think it's just about identifying that friction point in the different categories. Macy's, I think, recently launched like a try on some of the luxury beauty. You can like try on the lipstick. So it has to be executed well, I think, to be successful, but I think it's identifying what that friction point is.
Excellent. And Rody, I just got another question from one of our viewers. Talk about CPG changing to manage complexity. When e-com is still only less than 15% of your total business, how do you create the internal story to change capabilities when brick and mortar still predominantly drives your scale and are using their stores to fulfill omnichannel? So, how do you build that story, that narrative internally to get people to think differently about practices, complexity, whatever it might be?
Yeah. So it's a challenge, and I'll tell you right now, I have lots of clients that are struggling with it because of just the reason, right? It's, how do I get attention when this is, a small part of the pie? But that's also part of the reason why it's a small part of the pie. One of the things is to reframe the question. The reality is, let's talk about these customers. Who are these customers? Right. So, for example, what we find, and it varies by retailer, but like what we oftentimes find is like it's not there's a online e-commerce customer and there's an in-store customer. It's a person who does both, and they have different routines and different reasons why they're using one or the other. And so once you start to reposition it and start to talk about the customer, it's how do we keep and grow this customer? Because oftentimes the customer that's shopping you in multiple channels is your most loyal, is your most profitable, is your most engaged customer. And so that helps start to kind of reframe the conversation. I think the other piece is, the reality is, if you don't try to manage, like figure out how to manage that complexity and work within that complexity, then these challenger brands, these challenger organizations are just going to chip away at you, right? They're just going to chip. And before you know it, it's going to be too late. And we've seen a few companies who definitely, have kind of saw the chopping block because of that.
I totally agree with that, Rody. I think this is the $1 million question, right? Like especially if you're in a really large consumer packaged goods company, this is going to be a challenge. And I would echo everything that you just said. And I would also add that oftentimes what's happening in e-commerce, particularly in search and the brands being sold there, is a leading indicator of what's going to be happening in stores in future years. So, if there are brands that are performing really well in your competitive set online, but they're not yet in stores, they will be soon. So I think there's treating it as like a maybe an input metric or a leading indicator or a view into the future might help get some better support for it internally and better resources.
Great perspectives from you both. And with that, we're going to wrap this up. So I want to say thank you, Andrea Lee from Andrea Lee Consulting, for joining us today. Rody Wing from Kearney. Great to see both of you virtually, and great conversation. Appreciate your insights and your passion and enthusiasm for the topic. This episode has been recorded and will be archived on our website. You can find it at gmdc.org/infocasts. Our next thought leadership session will be episode 5 of the Startup Mic Drop series, which will be presented on Thursday, November 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll showcase companies focused on a broad range of CPG innovation in partnership with SKU from Austin, Texas. I'm Patrick Spear, and on behalf of the GMDC Retail Tomorrow team, thanks for your support. We'll see you next time. Andrea and Rody, thank you. You guys have a great day.